It was just after midnight when my phone buzzed, the soft chime breaking the heavy silence of our bedroom. I reached for it lazily, expecting a routine message, maybe a reminder, a funny meme, or the kind of late-night check-in texts my husband sometimes sent during deployments. But what I saw made my heart stall. A single line. 4 words. Cold, definitive, and utterly unrecognizable. Burn everything. At first, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button as if the right response could make sense of the chaos. My brain refused to process it. Burn everything. What does that mean? The words echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my carefully ordered world. I was shaking, but not violently, just enough that the phone trembled in my hand. The room felt too warm, yet the chill of fear crawled up my spine. I tried calling him. No answer. I texted again, but there was no response. The messages sat there, delivered, read, and yet unanswered, taunting me. My husband, a man I had married, trusted, and built a life with, was suddenly a stranger communicating in code, leaving me adrift in a storm I couldn't see. Humiliation hit first, sharper than fear. Not from strangers, not from anyone external, but from the private, intimate betrayal. How could the man I loved, whose life was steeped in discipline and loyalty, send me a message like this without context, without explanation, without care for the panic it would cause? It was a reminder of how fragile the illusion of control is, how easily the life you think you know can fracture into shards of uncertainty. I felt exposed, foolish for imagining security in a marriage defined by trust. I tried to reason. Maybe it was a mistake, a misfire of autocorrect. But no, my heart knew better. The tone, the brevity, the decisiveness, it was him, and it was deliberate. My mind raced through the last few months. The quiet tension I had brushed off, the cryptic phone calls, the hurried departures. Was this the culmination of a secret I was never meant to uncover? Had I truly known him at all? The humiliation deepened when I considered how this would look if anyone knew. Friends, family, colleagues, they would see the situation as absurd, dramatic, or worse, my fault. I imagined their whispered speculations. She never noticed the signs. She trusted too easily. She ignored the warning signals. The thought made my stomach churn. Being blindsided emotionally was one thing, but the idea that others might judge me for it made the pain heavier, almost unbearable. Sleep became impossible. I stared at the ceiling, the message burning itself into my vision. Burn everything. Repetition made it worse. I replayed the last conversation we had, scanning for hidden meanings, tone, and clues that might explain the command. Nothing fit. Every memory contradicted the text. The man I married, the Marine I adored, had been my anchor, my confidant. And now, he felt like a ghost leaving behind a riddle I wasn't equipped to solve. In the hours that followed, I wandered through the house, touching objects as if their presence could anchor reality. His favorite mug, the books he left scattered on the shelf, the framed photograph of us on a sunny beach vacation, all seemed tainted by ambiguity. Was this a signal to destroy these memories? Or worse, a warning to prepare for a loss I couldn't yet comprehend? Every object became a symbol of fear and betrayal, and the humiliation of my ignorance gnawed at me relentlessly. By dawn, the panic had given way to icy determination. I couldn't ignore this message. I couldn't bury it, brush it off, or pretend it didn't exist. The man I married may have sent the text, but I would not be paralyzed by fear or humiliation. I started making mental lists, calls to make, people to alert, steps to understand the situation. Each item was a small act of control in a world that had suddenly become chaotic. Yet the emotional toll was crushing. I felt ridiculous crying over a text, yet I couldn't stop. Each wave of tears was a mixture of fear, grief, and humiliation. The humiliation of realizing that the man I trusted could leave me in such uncertainty, the humiliation of feeling powerless, the humiliation of imagining how others would perceive my apparent naivety. I was drowning, and the tide was relentless. Hours later, when the sun rose and spilled gold across the floorboards, I finally allowed myself to sit with the fear. The message had shattered something in me, the illusion of knowing, the certainty of love, the sense of control. But in the same moment, it ignited something else, the first spark of resolve. I would find answers. I would understand why he sent this text, and I would face whatever truths lay ahead, no matter how humiliating, painful, or dangerous. I took a deep breath, phone in hand, staring at the words again. Burn everything. It was no longer just a command, it was a challenge, and I would not back down. That single line of text had ripped the world I knew apart. It had humiliated me, frightened me, and left me vulnerable. But it had also awakened a part of me I hadn't yet met, the part of me capable of facing uncertainty with courage, of demanding answers, and of reclaiming agency in a situation designed to strip it away. The journey had begun. I still remember the first time I met him, the confidence, the quiet authority in his stride, the kind of presence that demanded attention without asking for it. He was different from anyone I'd ever known, a Marine through and through, and yet there was warmth behind the discipline, a gentleness that drew me in even as his world remained steeped in order, rules, and a level of secrecy I didn't yet understand. Our courtship felt cinematic. Dates were punctuated with laughter and conversation, but always tinged with the reality of his obligations. Military life was never just a career. It was a calling, a lifestyle, and a set of sacrifices that affected every relationship he entered. I admired him, even when it frustrated me. The long deployments, the late-night drills, the abrupt disappearances that left me sitting at a dinner table with empty chairs. I told myself I understood, that love meant patience and sacrifice. And for years I believed I did. The wedding day was a blur of joy, nerves, and solemnity. His uniform gleamed under the afternoon sun, perfectly pressed, insignia shining, ribbons and medals aligned in meticulous order. I had never seen him like that. So formal, so exact, yet his gaze softened the moment it met mine. I remember the words we exchanged in hushed tones just before we walked down the aisle, promises of loyalty, support, and enduring love. At the time, I felt invincible. We were partners, aligned not just by marriage, but by unspoken respect and shared dreams. Married life was an adjustment, as it always is, but I reveled in it. We developed rhythms, inside jokes, and shared routines that felt comforting against the backdrop of his demanding career. There were moments of struggle, of course, the nights he returned exhausted from a deployment, the tension when he had to leave abruptly, but love, I told myself, required endurance. I learned to navigate the delicate balance between independence and connection, understanding that a Marine's life came with sacrifices I might not fully comprehend. Yet beneath the surface, there were hints of something I couldn't quite name. Brief moments of sharpness, unexplained absences, and secrets he guarded too fiercely to share. I brushed them off, attributing it to his training, the secrecy inherent to his work, and the discipline required of a Marine. I trusted him, perhaps blindly. I wanted to believe that our love was enough to bridge the gaps his career imposed, that intimacy could survive even when complete transparency was impossible. Our home became a sanctuary, a place where I felt I knew him fully. I memorized his routines, anticipated his needs, and learned to read the subtle cues of his moods. I thought I understood his world. And then came the deployments, long, grueling, and unpredictable. I counted days, tracked his locations when possible, and waited with a mix of pride and anxiety. Communication was limited, but the letters, calls, and rare texts reminded me that love persisted, even when distance imposed a cold reality. Over the years, I watched him change, not in ways I could control, but in ways that defined him as a Marine. Discipline, courage, and the ability to compartmentalize danger became second nature. I admired his strength, even when it frustrated me, and I marveled at his capacity to endure. Yet, I also noticed how that strength sometimes created barriers between us. There were silences he wouldn't fill, stories he couldn't share, and a guardedness that I mistook for normalcy. I assumed trust, loyalty, and love could bridge all gaps. I was wrong. We built a life together, complete with small victories and quiet joys. Holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings were moments of reprieve from his intense career. I became adept at managing the household, coordinating around deployments, and supporting him without losing myself. Love felt like a balancing act, and for years I performed it well. Friends remarked on our partnership, on how seamlessly we seemed to navigate the challenges of military life. I believed them. I believed myself. But even in those years, subtle signs hinted at shadows I refused to acknowledge. Occasional evasive answers, sudden changes in tone, and cryptic comments I tried to ignore. I justified it. He's a Marine, trained to keep secrets, to protect information I don't need to know. I clung to that explanation, allowing love and trust to obscure unease. In hindsight, each ignored sign was a thread in the fabric of a story I had yet to comprehend fully, a warning I didn't recognize until it was too late. And then there were the texts, mundane, caring, or playful, that I had come to expect, little anchors that reminded me he was near even when he was far. They were proof, I thought, of continuity, love, and reliability, until that one night when everything changed. One line, 4 words, and a message that shattered every assumption I had ever made. Burn everything. It was impossible to reconcile the Marine I married, the man I trusted, the partner who had shared my life, the man who had built a home, celebrated birthdays, and nurtured dreams, with the stranger who sent that text. The man I knew had honor, integrity, and loyalty, not just to country, but to the promises he made in our marriage. And yet, the reality staring back at me was starkly different. He had become someone I couldn't recognize, and the foundation of my life, the trust one had placed in him, was suddenly unstable, uncertain, and frightening. For the first time, I began to question everything. The love I thought was unshakable, the life we had built, the man I had trusted implicitly, were they illusions? Had I been naive, blind to the cracks? Or was there a reason, buried deep in his world, that I was only now beginning to understand? The humiliation wasn't just in the message itself, but in the revelation that I might have never truly known him. The Marine I married had shaped my life in profound ways, teaching me resilience, patience, and the art of endurance. But the husband who sent that text had awakened a reality I could no longer ignore. And as the night stretched into early morning, the truth became clear. My journey was only beginning, and it would demand courage, clarity, and strength I hadn't yet fully realized I possessed. The day after the text, the world felt heavier. The sun rose, casting light across our home, but nothing seemed ordinary anymore. Every sound, every shadow, every faint creak of the floorboards carried the weight of uncertainty. I moved through my routine mechanically, making coffee, feeding the dog, checking my phone for a message that never came. Each chime, each vibration, tightened the coil of anxiety in my chest. Silence, I realized, was now the loudest presence in my life. No calls, no clarifying texts, no explanations, just a ghost of 4 words. Burn everything. The lack of response became its own form of humiliation, public in the sense that I felt it in every interaction, private in how it gnawed at my sense of self. Friends noticed my distraction, coworkers remarked on my unusual quietness, and I smiled through it all, hiding the fear that churned inside. Even the house felt complicit in the tension. His side of the closet was untouched, his favorite chair unoccupied. The photos on the walls seemed accusatory, frozen in happier times that now felt distant and fragile. Each object reminded me of the life I thought I knew, a life now appended by a single cryptic message. Humiliation came not from others, but from the realization that I had been blind to subtle signs, blind to the secrets he carried, blind to the fragility of the trust one had placed in him. I tried reaching him again, carefully crafted texts designed to coax a response without sounding desperate. "Are you okay? Can you explain? I need to know what this means." Each ping of the phone became torture, each unread indicator a stab of doubt. Hours passed, days passed, and still silence. My mind raced, filling in the gaps with worst-case scenarios, legal trouble, danger, betrayal, disaster. The uncertainty was suffocating. At work, I found it impossible to focus. Meetings blurred together, conversations seemed distant, and my colleagues noticed the tension behind my eyes. Questions came, small, well-intentioned probes. "Everything okay at home?" I forced a smile, nodding, hiding the panic that threatened to surface. The humiliation of appearing vulnerable while grappling with a personal crisis gnawed at me. I had always prided myself on composure, on being the calm in the storm, yet now I felt stripped bare. The silence also made me question my own judgment. Had I ignored the warning signs? Were there clues in his behavior I had dismissed as normal military secrecy? Every detail of our past months replayed in my mind: unexplained absences, late-night phone calls, sudden trips with vague explanations. I felt foolish, realizing that the man I trusted had always been partially unknowable, and now the veil had been ripped away. Humiliation was no longer just external, it had become internal, a relentless conversation in my own head. I started reaching out to friends in subtle ways, asking innocuous questions, feeling the need for perspective without revealing the gravity of the situation. Some reassured me, some didn't notice the tension I hid so carefully. None could provide answers. None could pierce the fog of silence enveloping my life. Each failed attempt left me more isolated, more vulnerable, more aware of how utterly alone I felt in the face of uncertainty. Nights were worse. Sleep evaded me. The phone sat on my nightstand like a ticking bomb. Every vibration, every chime made me jump. I replayed the text endlessly. Burn everything. Its brevity was terrifying. Its authority undeniable. Its intent opaque. What did he mean? Did he mean literal destruction? Emotional? Financial? Physical? The ambiguity was cruel. My imagination, once a source of creativity, became a theater of worst-case scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. Even when I attempted normal activities, grocery shopping, errands, visiting friends, the text was a shadow over every interaction. Strangers' conversations, casual remarks, even the headlines on the news felt amplified, somehow relevant to my private chaos. The humiliation of appearing distracted, anxious, or off balance in public compounded the fear. I had spent a lifetime building a persona of competence and composure, and here was unraveling in ways I could not contain. I turned to research, trying to find some logical explanation. Military jargon, recent news reports, anything that could contextualize the message. But the silence persisted. Every lead led to a dead end. Each dead end deepened my despair and intensified the suspense of what was to come. I felt as though I were standing on the edge of a storm, knowing it would arrive but uncertain in what form, uncertain in how to survive it, and painfully aware that the person who had created it was the one I had trusted most. By the third day, the weight of isolation was unbearable. I realized the danger wasn't just in the message, it was in the silence that followed. Silence allowed fear to fester, humiliation to deepen, and the unknown to dictate every thought. And so, I began documenting everything: the time I received the text, my attempts to reach him, the strange patterns I had observed, the feelings of fear and betrayal. Writing became a lifeline, a way to anchor myself against the storm that seemed inevitable. Every day felt like walking through a minefield of uncertainty. The humiliation of not knowing, the fear of consequences I couldn't predict, and the suspense of what was coming next combined to create a tension that was almost physical. My heart raced at the smallest sound, my mind plotted every possible scenario, and my body carried the stress and aches, tension and restless nights. The world had become a stage of suspense, and I was trapped in the central act. And yet, amid the fear and humiliation, a spark of determination flickered. I was not powerless, no matter how small my agency felt. If he had sent that message expecting confusion, panic, or submission, I would not provide it. I would survive. I would uncover the truth. I would face the storm on my own terms. The silence before the storm was complete, thick and suffocating. Every moment of inaction, every unanswered question, every cryptic thought made the approaching confrontation inevitable. I could not predict the shape it would take, nor could I control it, but I knew one thing with certainty: I would not be broken by fear or humiliation. I would meet the storm. I would endure, and I would emerge on the other side, armed with the lessons of betrayal, resilience, and courage. The storm was coming, and I had no choice but to stand ready. Days of silence had stretched into a suffocating haze. Every hour that passed felt like a drumbeat counting down to some inevitable confrontation, and yet I had no idea what awaited me. The message, stark and uncompromising, burn everything, had dominated every waking thought, transforming the familiar walls of my home into a labyrinth of suspicion, fear, and fragmented memories. I realized that I could no longer wait for answers to come to me. I had to seek them. I began retracing his footsteps, his routines, his phone calls, the subtle changes in behavior I had once excused. Everything now demanded scrutiny. The Marine I had married was disciplined, meticulous, and deliberate. Every action had meaning. If he sent that message, there was a reason, and uncovering it would require patience, observation, and courage I didn't yet know I possessed. I contacted mutual friends under the guise of casual conversation, probing gently for clues. Some reassured me, citing deployments or miscommunications. Others seemed uneasy, avoiding eye contact or changing the subject. I noticed a pattern. People who had been close to him seemed to harbor knowledge they couldn't or wouldn't share. Every silence, every hesitation, amplified the suspense. Each unanswered question became a thread I needed to pull, each cryptic glance a puzzle piece that might unlock the truth. Then came the breakthrough. A message, not from him directly, but from a trusted colleague of his. It was carefully worded, hesitant, yet unmistakable. There are things you don't understand. He is protecting you. Follow instructions, stay safe. My heart raced as I read it repeatedly. Protection? Instructions? I felt relief and panic in equal measure. The storm I feared had a shape now, but it was far more complex, far more dangerous than I had imagined. Piecing it together, the reality began to crystallize. The message wasn't personal cruelty, nor a reflection of indifference. It was a warning. A directive meant to safeguard me from forces I had never known existed. My husband's life as a Marine had always been opaque, but now the layers peeled back to reveal stakes I could barely comprehend. Sensitive missions, threats to his team, and perhaps even danger extending to me, by virtue of proximity and trust. I thought back to every moment of tension in our past, the sudden trips, the unspoken orders, the times he had left without explanation. I realized now that these were not lapses in judgment or intimacy, but calculated measures to shield me from a reality I wasn't yet ready to face. The humiliation I had felt, the fear and confusion, were born from ignorance. I had assumed betrayal, when in fact it was protection. The truth cut both ways, terrifying in its intensity, yet deeply grounding in its explanation. I also discovered another layer, an operational reality that required strict compliance. The words, "burn everything," were literal in a sense I could never have anticipated. Documents, communications, traces of information, all needed to be secured, eliminated, or redirected. Every decision my husband had made was calculated, a line drawn in the sand to protect both his mission and the lives connected to it. The enormity of the responsibility he bore, and the burden he had carried in silence, was almost incomprehensible. The revelation was both liberating and frightening. My fear of betrayal and the humiliation of perceived ignorance transformed into a solemn understanding of the stakes at hand. The man I had married was not the cold, unfeeling figure I had imagined in my panic. He was deliberate, disciplined, and fiercely protective, even at the cost of misunderstanding, distance, and emotional turmoil. The truth reshaped my perception of him, of our marriage, and of the life we had built together. Yet understanding the reasoning did not erase the emotional impact. The shock, the confusion, and the anxiety of those days lingered. I realized that even when the motives were protective, the method had been harsh, leaving me emotionally vulnerable. The revelation required reconciliation, both with my own feelings and with the reality of the man I trusted. I was beginning to understand the delicate balance between operational necessity and personal intimacy, and the immense courage it took to navigate both simultaneously. I spent hours reviewing every interaction, every message, every moment we had shared. Patterns emerged where I had once seen chaos, deliberate strategy where I had once seen indifference. The Marine I had married was a man of precision, not recklessness, of foresight, not caprice. And while the message had initially shattered my world, it now became a lens through which I could view the extraordinary responsibility he carried and the extraordinary trust he had placed in me, even from a distance. In the days that followed, I began implementing precautions, locking sensitive documents, securing personal records, and preparing for contingencies, all while maintaining the facade of normalcy in the eyes of friends, family, and coworkers. Every act of diligence was a testament to the revelation I had received. Understanding did not eliminate risk, but it empowered me to navigate it with intelligence, courage, and clarity. The storm, once invisible and incomprehensible, had a form now. I could anticipate it, prepare for it, and face it. The humiliation and fear I had felt in the silence before had transformed into purpose and resolve. I was no longer adrift. I was anchored by knowledge, strategy, and a renewed sense of agency. The man who sent the message was no longer a stranger. He was a protector, a strategist, and a partner operating in a world I was only beginning to understand. By the end of that week, I had come to a fragile equilibrium. The terror had not vanished, nor had the intensity of the situation diminished, but I had reclaimed some measure of control. The revelation behind the text had illuminated both danger and intention, fear and care, secrecy and love. And while the journey ahead would test every ounce of courage I possessed, I knew one thing with clarity. I was no longer a passive observer in my life. I was an active participant, informed, alert, and prepared. The truth behind the text was revealed, not as cruelty, not as abandonment, but as a measure of protection, strategy, and love in a life defined by extraordinary stakes. And with that understanding, I began the next phase of the journey, confronting the reality that had been set before me, navigating it with intelligence, and reclaiming the strength that had been dormant during the days of fear and humiliation. The storm had a shape now, and I was ready to face it. By the time I began taking action, the adrenaline had already anchored itself deep inside me. Fear had shifted into focus, panic into precision. The message, burn everything, had revealed its true purpose, not as a threat, but as a lifeline, a warning. Yet understanding did not make the situation safe. If anything, it made the stakes clearer, more urgent. My survival, both literal and emotional, now depended on swift, deliberate action. I started with securing the essentials: personal documents, financial records, and anything that could serve as a breadcrumb for danger to track. My hands shook at first, the tremor fueled by the weeks of tension, isolation, and unanswered questions. But as I methodically checked each drawer, locked every safe, and cataloged sensitive information, I felt a sense of empowerment take hold. I realized that survival wasn't passive. It was deliberate, strategic, and above all, courageous. Every interaction became a test. Calls had to be precise, emails carefully worded, and inquiries subtly made. I could not reveal too much. Ignorance was safer than exposure. Friends and family remained in the dark, unaware of the life-or-death calculus unfolding behind the walls of my home. Even simple errands felt fraught with tension. Every stranger could be a potential observer, every routine action a risk. The fear was tangible, but it no longer paralyzed me, it sharpened me. The challenge of surviving in secrecy was compounded by the emotional turmoil. The man I loved, the Marine who had been my partner in life, had deliberately removed me from full understanding. Trust, once absolute, had been fractured by necessity. Yet I recognized that anger, while natural, was a luxury I could not afford. Survival demanded discipline, the very trait my husband had instilled in me over years of partnership. I drew upon every lesson learned about planning, timing, anticipation, and patience to navigate the dangerous landscape laid before me. Each day required careful calculation. I established contingencies for worst-case scenarios, routes out of the house, hidden caches of essential documents, and emergency contacts carefully selected for discretion and reliability. Every detail mattered. The humiliation of realizing how unprepared I had once been for this level of threat became fuel rather than weakness. I was no longer a passive participant in my life. I had become a strategist, thinking several moves ahead, anticipating obstacles before they appeared. But the danger was real. Shadows of uncertainty followed me constantly: unexpected visitors, unexplained phone calls, and the looming fear of exposure or betrayal. It was a psychological war as much as a practical one. I felt eyes on me even when alone, a tension that refused to release its grip. The fight to survive was not simply about physical safety. It was about maintaining composure, control, and mental clarity amidst chaos designed to destabilize me. In the midst of this, I found moments of reflection. I recalled my husband's discipline, his strategic mind, and the way he had navigated impossible situations without ever faltering. I realized that the very qualities I had once resented, the secrecy, the rigid rules, the occasional coldness, were now my tools. I adopted his mindset, not blindly, but with adaptation, taking lessons from his training and applying them to my own survival. Fear became calculation, panic became planning, and isolation became opportunity for focus. The first major test came unexpectedly. An anonymous call hinted that information had been compromised. Something I had assumed was secure might have been traced. My stomach turned as I assessed the situation, weighing options with the precision of a Marine mission briefing. Panic threatened, but I pushed it aside, replacing it with action. Locks were rechecked, digital footprints erased, and communication channels secured. Every choice mattered, every delay could be costly, and every small victory reinforced my growing competence. Through the intensity, a profound transformation took place. The humiliation of weeks prior, of feeling powerless, of being blindsided by a man I trusted, evolved into resilience. Every obstacle became a measure of my determination, every threat an opportunity to reclaim agency. I recognized the truth. Survival required not just following instructions but mastering fear, taking initiative, and making decisions under pressure. I was no longer the woman who had received a cryptic message and been paralyzed by it. I was the woman capable of responding to it with strength and strategy. The tension also forced clarity in relationships. I discerned who could be trusted and who could not, relying only on those whose loyalty and discretion were unwavering. Conversations became more calculated, alliances more deliberate, and every interaction was a measure of strategy. This was no longer about social niceties. This was life and death. And in embracing that reality, I discovered an unexpected strength, the ability to act decisively under pressure, to trust my instincts, and to wield the lessons learned from a lifetime shaped by love, fear, and discipline. Night after night, I rehearsed scenarios, evaluated risks, and reinforced my resolve. The house, once a sanctuary, became a command center. Maps, notes, and emergency plans were laid out in quiet determination. I knew that survival was not a single act. It was a continuous effort, a test of endurance, strategy, and emotional fortitude. And as the days progressed, I realized that the fight to survive had also become a fight to reclaim myself, the woman who had been rendered vulnerable by silence, fear, and humiliation was now becoming unshakable. By the end of the week, the storm I had anticipated began to take form. Threats became clearer, challenges more defined, and the need for action unavoidable. I had navigated the first stage with strategy and resolve, emerging stronger, more aware, and unflinchingly focused. The lessons of humiliation had been transformed into armor, the lessons of fear into foresight, and the lessons of uncertainty into strength. I understood now that the fight to survive was as much about character as circumstance. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Resilience was not the avoidance of pain, but the ability to move through it unbroken. And honor, true honor, was measured not by comfort or safety, but by how one faced the trials that demanded every ounce of will and every shred of integrity. The storm had begun, but I was ready. The confrontation arrived quietly, almost deceptively. No dramatic warning, no sirens, no flashing lights, just the unmistakable presence of the man who had sent the message that had upended my world. For 10 days, I had prepared for this moment in every conceivable way, mentally, physically, emotionally. Every contingency planned, every scenario rehearsed, every instinct sharpened. And yet, when he stepped into the room, the surge of emotion was immediate, overwhelming, and undeniable. He looked different. Not in appearance. He was the same disciplined, composed Marine I had married, but in the weight he carried. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the unspoken truths that had been dangling over our lives for weeks. My heart pounded. My palms were slick with nervous anticipation, and yet I stood firm. The humiliation of the past, the fear, the panic, they had all been distilled into a singular, unwavering resolve. I would face him without flinching. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it, but it carried all the pain, confusion, and frustration I had been holding in. Why the message? Why the silence? Why the fear? Why the threat? He paused, eyes flicking to mine, the gravity of the situation reflected in a gaze I had never fully understood until now. "It was necessary," he said simply, the words steady, precise, but laden with meaning. Everything I did was to protect you. To protect us. For a moment, I felt the weight of understanding begin to press down. Protection. That single word reframed everything. Every act that had seemed opaque, every instance of distance or secrecy, now carried purpose. And yet, the betrayal I had felt did not vanish. It had to be confronted, examined, and acknowledged before any reconciliation could occur. You endangered me, I said, voice trembling but steady, by leaving me in the dark, by forcing me to face this alone. Each word was deliberate, each syllable a measure of the fear, anger, and humiliation I had endured. I had no idea what was happening, and I could have, I could have lost everything. His jaw tightened. The man I had married, the man I still loved, complicated and frustrating as he was, acknowledged the gravity of my words. I know, he said quietly, and I regret that. But you have to trust that my silence was a shield, not a weapon. You were never in danger because of me. You were in danger because of forces I could not disclose. The room seemed to shrink, the tension between us almost tangible. Every word carried weight, every pause filled with the unspoken. I realized then that this confrontation was not just about answers, it was about reclaiming agency, asserting my own power, and demanding accountability in a world where I had been left to question everything I had known. What forces? I asked, voice low but insistent. I needed clarity, needed the truth laid bare. Fear and humiliation had driven me to this moment, but it was resolve that carried me forward. I would not be passive any longer. He exhaled sharply. Operations. Sensitive missions. Threats to my unit. Threats to you if information leaked. You had to follow instructions without full knowledge. Your compliance was the only way to ensure safety. It was a lot to process. The magnitude of his responsibility, the weight of secrecy, and the precision required in every decision became clearer. And yet, the humiliation, fear, and anger were still present, layered atop one another like a shield I had to dismantle piece by piece. This confrontation was not just emotional, it was psychological, a test of resilience, comprehension, and courage. I let myself absorb it, let the truth wash over me. The man who had sent the message, who had withdrawn into silence, who had created fear and uncertainty in my life, it was not cruelty. It was protection. My heart raced not with panic, but with understanding. And with understanding came a complicated mix of relief, residual anger, and cautious admiration. You expect me to forgive the fear, the panic, the humiliation? I asked, every word deliberate, every emotion calibrated. It was a question, but also a demand for honesty, for accountability, for acknowledgement of the chaos that had been thrust upon me. He nodded, a solemn acknowledgement of the reality he had imposed upon me. I don't ask for blind forgiveness. I only ask for understanding that the danger was real and that every decision I made, however harsh it seemed, was to keep you safe. The confrontation continued, a measured dance of words and silences. Questions followed, about instructions, consequences, the logic behind the cryptic warning. Every answer added clarity. Every explanation shifted the landscape of fear into a landscape of comprehension. I felt the pieces falling into place, yet the emotional residue of those 10 days of uncertainty lingered like a shadow. As the dialogue unfolded, I realized something profound. This confrontation was not merely about explanation, it was about reclamation. I was reclaiming my right to understand, my right to assert my voice, and my right to navigate the reality of my life with clarity. The humiliation I had endured was acknowledged, the fear validated, and my agency restored. By the end of the conversation, a fragile equilibrium was achieved. The truth had been revealed, the motives clarified, and the consequences understood. But more importantly, I had faced the confrontation I had feared, not with avoidance, not with panic, but with courage, determination, and clarity. I was no longer the passive recipient of cryptic commands. I was an active participant in the resolution of my life's chaos. The storm had intensified, yes, but I had emerged prepared. The confrontation, once a source of terror, had become a proving ground. My resolve, sharpened through fear, humiliation, and uncertainty, had carried me through. And as I watched him leave the room, a sense of quiet strength settled over me, the kind that comes not from control over others, but control over one's own response, one's own choices, and one's own destiny. I had faced the confrontation I feared, and in doing so, I had taken the final step toward reclaiming my life. The days after the confrontation were quiet, but not in the way silence had once haunted me. This quiet was different, steady, grounded, and full of a sense of regained control. I woke each morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks, a rare combination of relief, resolve, and cautious optimism. The storm had passed, and though the echoes of fear and humiliation lingered, they no longer dictated my every thought. The first step toward reclaiming my life was simple yet profound: trust. Not blind trust, but informed trust. Trust grounded in understanding, in knowledge, in the acknowledgement of what had occurred. I had faced the man I loved, demanded answers, and received them. I had confronted the chaos he had inadvertently thrust upon me and emerged intact. That realization alone was empowering. I had survived, and in surviving, I had reclaimed a piece of myself I feared was lost forever. I began re-establishing routines that had been disrupted during the tense days of uncertainty. Mornings became a time for reflection, planning, and small acts of normalcy. Making coffee without anxiety, walking the dog without looking over my shoulder, organizing our home with intention rather than fear. Each small task, mundane though it seemed, was an act of reclamation, a statement that life, though fragile, continued on terms I could influence. Communication with him shifted as well. No longer was it dictated by cryptic warnings or distant commands. We began discussing our lives openly, carefully unpacking the events that had led to fear, confusion, and misunderstanding. He shared his reasoning in detail, offering a transparency previously withheld, not out of malice but necessity. And in turn, I shared the emotional toll, the nights of sleepless panic, and the humiliation of feeling powerless. These conversations were difficult, sometimes tense, but profoundly necessary. They became the bridge between fear and understanding, between chaos and connection. I also realized that reclaiming my life meant reclaiming my identity outside the shadows of secrecy and danger. I re-engaged with friends, renewed connections I had let lapse, and allowed myself to be present without constantly calculating risks. Social interactions, once tense and fraught with imagined consequences, became restorative rather than draining. Each laugh, each casual conversation, was a step toward normalcy and a declaration that my life was mine again. The process was not instantaneous. Residual fear lingered in moments of quiet, and the memory of the message, "burn everything," occasionally surfaced, sharp and jarring. But each time it did, I reminded myself, knowledge had replaced ignorance, agency had replaced helplessness, and clarity had replaced doubt. I had walked through fear and humiliation, through suspense and confrontation, and I had emerged whole. That truth became my anchor. Reclaiming my life also meant redefining the relationship I had with him. The man I married had made choices that terrified me, yes, but he had done so with a singular purpose: protection. Understanding that truth did not erase the fear, but it allowed me to integrate it into a narrative of resilience rather than betrayal. Our partnership, once shadowed by secrecy, now operated with a balance of caution and transparency, discipline and care. Together, we rebuilt a sense of safety that was no longer fragile, but fortified by shared understanding. I turned attention to my own personal growth as well. The days of panic had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed: resourcefulness, patience, courage, and the capacity to act decisively under pressure. These traits, once latent, became integral to who I was. I began pursuing goals that had been deferred, taking small but significant steps toward personal achievements I had once considered impossible. The humiliation of feeling powerless became a memory, replaced by the pride of knowing I could navigate crises without losing myself. Family life regained its rhythm. I cherished ordinary moments, the laughter of our children, the warmth of shared meals, the comfort of routine. These small, everyday experiences were a testament to resilience, a reminder that life's beauty persisted even after fear and chaos. And in embracing them fully, I realized that reclaiming my life was not about erasing the past, but integrating it, learning from it, growing through it, and using it as a foundation for a future defined by strength, clarity, and connection. As weeks turned into months, the memory of that one line of text, "Burn everything," lost its power to intimidate. It became a symbol, not of fear, but of the journey I had undertaken. A marker of transformation. The humiliation that had once crushed me was now a reminder of resilience. The suspense that had paralyzed me had been replaced by foresight, and the confrontation that had terrified me had revealed an inner strength I hadn't fully recognized until tested. In the end, I realized that life, like a storm, could be navigated. Fear, humiliation, and uncertainty were inevitable parts of the journey, but they did not have to define it. I had faced them, endured them, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than I had ever imagined. I had reclaimed not just my life, but my sense of self, my agency, and my voice. Sitting in the quiet of our home one evening, I looked around at the life I had fought to preserve, the familiar furniture, the photographs of memories, the soft hum of life continuing on its ordinary course. I felt gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, and for the resilience I had discovered within myself. I realized that reclaiming my life was not about returning to the past, but about embracing the present with courage, clarity, and purpose. I had walked through fear, faced confrontation, and endured humiliation. And now I was unshaken. I had reclaimed my life,